Hello and welcome to episode 90 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by friend of the show, Mets insider for Sports Illustrated, Pat Ragazzo, fellow Paisan. How we doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
I'm great, Sal. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on again.
Absolutely. I know you don't, anywhere on an off day, you wouldn't rather be anywhere but here, so we appreciate it. But, obviously Tuesday, the deadline came and went. Everybody seems like the Mets did pretty well as a whole. Obviously didn't really leverage the future for anything, which everyone had a sense that they weren't going to do, that Stearns wasn't really going to be leveraging anything just for 1 year. But just want to get your thoughts kind of overall of Tuesday's deadline and just how you're feeling with how the Mets did here.
I think solid B. I was thinking B minus initially, but I think a B is fair for the Mets. They added some bullpen arms.
Mm-hmm.
Brazoban was a pretty big acquisition, underrated acquisition maybe from the Marlins. And I know he's a little older, but has a number of years of control.
Mm-hmm.
They got Ryan Stanek, of course, who has some past success, and Phil Maton, which was an earlier pickup. Tyler Zubner, we're going to see. He's in AAA right now. We'll see if he's brought up to the majors soon. And then Jesse Winker was a pretty solid acquisition. That's what they gave up. The biggest piece they gave up was Tyler Stewart, starting pitcher, number 17 overall prospect in their farm system. But beyond that, they didn't mortgage the future. David Stearns stuck to his plan, and Mets are better. And they just took a series from Minnesota, who's a pretty good team this year, a playoff contender. And I know they weren't able to complete the sweep, but yeah, I think the Mets have a pretty good shot down the stretch here. I mean, they never were going to get a Tanner Scott or some of the starting pitchers. I mean, I reported on, I want to say early afternoon on the deadline day on Tuesday that the Mets were talking to the Marlins about Trevor Rogers, and then the Orioles gave up their number 5 overall prospect in their very deep system to get him. Just the prices for pitching, as usual, are always astronomically high. But this year, no one was really competing with the Orioles and the Padres, who are always aggressive when it came to acquiring some of the top pitchers on the market. The Mets just weren't matching up given the year that it was. And David Stearns said that a number of teams kept asking about their top prospects over and over again, and they just didn't feel like this was the year to make a deal of that magnitude and kind of sell the farm a little bit, even though the Mets have proven that they, maybe they could make some noise in the NL if they wind up winning a wild card spot. But at the same time, this was never really going to be an all-in year, and they've stayed consistent with that plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, they got Paul Blackburn from the A's, someone that should fill out the back end of that rotation now. I know he's been active the last couple of months, an ankle fracture or something like that. So an injury, nothing arm, shoulder, anything like that related. So you're happy there. Someone that when he does pitch has success. So, we'd like to see that as well. And with that kind of, I was going to say as well, kind of this deadline shows the confidence they have in guys like Minaya and Severino, right? I know they were, kind of beginning of the month and going into the trade deadline, possibly maybe moving one of those guys like a Minaya or Quintana on an expiring contract to try and get some better back. But I guess obviously with the market like it was, like you were talking about with, just what teams are asking for starters, I think it shows that they were happy or not happy, but more comfortable with the guys that they have in the rotation, especially, at the top with Severino, Minaya. And at least in Minaya's case, he's proved them right. Had his best start as a Met the other day against the Twins, 11 strikeouts over 7 innings. So obviously Severino, a bit of a shaky start there in Minnesota, but I think it's a nice little confidence boost for the guys that they have. Stern saying, you had a good first half. We're going to ride you out here to see what happens.
I think there's a chance that Kodai Senga could be back by the postseason.
Sure.
I mean, it's all but said that he's not returning in the regular season, and it was a huge blow. I was on hand last Friday night against the Braves, and Senga looked pretty electric. 5 1/3, 9 strikeouts, and that last out he came off the mound, strained his calf, and it wound up being pretty much the worst case scenario. Beyond it being a full tear, obviously would have been the worst, but a high grade that's going to knock him out after 5.1 innings in the regular season, his first start of the year. They've been waiting on him to come back, and he looked as good as advertised. He looked like he looked down the stretch last year when he got the runner-up for NL Rookie of the Year, and then it just goes to show you, like, you can never have too much pitching. So I wrote a couple times leading up to the deadline, prior to the injury to Senga, prior to the injury to Christian Scott, how maybe they could move a veteran starter to get some bullpen help. But you see now why that's such a risk, because you can never have too much pitching. You can never have too much starting pitching, because 1 minute the Mets looked like they were deep in the rotation with Senga coming back. They called Scott back up from the minors, and then now they're pretty thin there. And I do like that. I did leave that out, obviously, but Paul Blackburn was a good acquisition for them. Solid guy, reliable. I believe he broke the metatarsal bone in his foot.
Okay.
Missed around 2 months, I believe, maybe a little more than that. But yeah, he's just a reliable guy. He's not like a sexy name or acquisition, but at the same time, he's a reliable arm in the rotation, to where now they could utilize Tyler McGill in a relief role, which seems like it's going to be the plan moving forward. I never agreed with the blueprint of going to a 6-man rotation. I think that was more about Kodai Senga is used to getting an extra day's rest, only pitching once a week in Japan. I think that was more to appease Senga. I don't think it ever made sense, because their bullpen's been so shaky this year and also banged up, and they were going to have to take a reliever out of the bullpen and go with 7 relief arms and 6 starting pitchers. I just think that it was kind of a risk and something that didn't make sense. So they're not ruling out a 6-man rotation, but if Senga's not in the fold the rest of the regular season, I don't know why they would go to that. I don't think that they will. And they also have some off days coming up, including today, obviously. So yeah, they don't need to even think about 6 starters for a little bit now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you talk about the injuries to Senga, the injuries to Scott. Now, obviously, the addition of Blackburn, like we said, it rounds out kind of the back end of the rotation here. But do you still think that there's a chance that Jose Butto has to pitch or make some starts, in the stretch run here? Do you think that at this point, talking about how shaky the bullpen is, like you just said, that they really can't risk losing a guy that, has been so good pitching those 2-3 inning kind of swing, late innings for them? I'm just kind of curious there.
Yeah, I think Jose Butto is a necessity in the bullpen right now, that they can't move him out and back into the rotation. I know he's earned a spot in the rotation. He's been elite as a reliever, long man, since they brought him back from the minors, but he's also been walking less guys, which is really the reason he got sent down in May. I mean, he was pitching pretty well. He just was walking too many batters. And he's a potential piece in the future. If they go out and add enough bullpen in the offseason, then Butto could have a spot in the rotation next year, or in the moving forward in their future outlook. But right now they need him in the bullpen. He's very valuable there. And I would say Edwin Diaz has looked pretty good as of late as well. So that's a promising sign. And Dedniel Nunez going on the IL was pretty tough, but they're hopeful that he's going to be back pretty soon. I believe he just started throwing again, so they weren't too concerned there. So he's been their most consistent reliever, and he really wasn't into the fold as a mainstay in the bullpen until mid-May, but he's been really good since then. So if he's coming back, Reed Garrett is kind of nearing a return, as well as Sean Foley. Like, I don't think I ever thought that we'd be saying that Sean Reed Foley could be relied on as a key guy in the bullpen, but he had a ERA below 2 this year in about 23 appearances, I believe. So yeah, they do have some reinforcements coming, and Stearns did a good job trading for some guys, some proven veteran arms to help out that unit down the stretch.
Yeah, definitely. I know you mentioned Jesse Winker a little bit too there. I just want to talk about him a bit. Obviously, Mets fans know him from, playing at Cincinnati, the whole waving thing. Seems like a guy that would do well here. It seems like he had that kind of fun back and forth to the fans years before with all that. And also, again, on the baseball side, somebody that crushes righties, something the Mets need pretty desperately. I know Marte seems like he might be on the way back, but it seems like either way, whether it's Taylor or Marte, to have someone like Winker coming off the bench as a fourth outfield and be able to hit right-handed pitching, it's a nice platoon to have, and just lengthens out the lineup and the bench, I would say.
The more the merrier. Jesse Winker was having a good year with the Nationals, and he got displaced because James Wood. So it made sense for the Mets. They pulled it off by giving up Stewart. And yeah, it should help. I mean, Jeff McNeil's been on fire since the All-Star break concluded. And Starling Marte is getting set to begin a rehab assignment. So yeah, the Mets all of a sudden have some pretty solid outfield depth. And McNeil, out of nowhere, kind of they need to have his bat in the lineup, which is something we didn't think. Another thing we didn't think we'd be saying after the first half and after the year he had last year, that he's now a necessity in the lineup, it seems, and so is Jose Iglesias. So it's kind of some good problems for the Mets that they're pretty deep position player wise right now. So getting Winker was a really solid move.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The more, like you said, the more the merrier, especially in that lineup that's doing so well. You mentioned McNeil, who's had, it seems like post All-Star break second half really kind of come back to life, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just want to get your thoughts. I know Nimmo struggled a bit out the gate here, second half post All-Star break. Just wondering if, your thoughts on that, if you're hearing anything, he's pressing a little bit. It's just one of those things that ebbs and flows, and eventually he'll get hot here again.
Yeah, I mean, this has kind of been a little bit of a streaky year for Brandon Nimmo. Now, his last hot streak lasted a good bit.
Sure.
He was cold in the end of May, and everyone's kind of wondering what's going on with him. Why is he not having a good year? Is it because he started maybe getting a little pull happy that he set his career high in home runs last year, and then he caught fire. Him and Francisco Lindor were really leading the charge. Once Nimmo moved to the 2-hole, Lindor moved to the leadoff spot. And yeah, he's banged a couple foul balls off of his foot recently, and his knee, I believe. And I think he's fine physically, but yeah, it's just one of these little funks that he's in now. And yeah, like I said, it's kind of been a year of streaks for him. And Pete Alonso's been having a kind of weird year as well. I mean, he's hit pretty well since the second half began it too, but at the same time, like his numbers of runners in scoring position aren't very good this year. And yeah, I think that the Mets are just hoping that Alonso, remains productive as he's been since the All-Star break ended, and that Nimmo can get back on track pretty soon. Because even JD Martinez as well kind of went into a little bit of a slump. But even when he's in a slump, he's pretty productive. So yeah, the Mets lineup I think is probably the least of the worries right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You said with Alonso, which is pretty funny, just as far as some kind of struggling, feels like points pressing in kind of big spots. It feels like Lindor and Alonso was a little bit the opposite. Alonso was in his first few years was pretty clutch late in games and close games, and Lindor felt like it would be early and he'd kind of get a lot of his stuff in, if you want to call it garbage time or whatever. Feels like the opposite has happened now. Lindor's, really late in games when they need him to come through, he seems to be doing that. And at times, Pete looks to be pressing, but like you said, it's a lineup that's long, that produces a lot of runs, and it seems like they can at least pick each other up. And when one guy, so to speak, isn't able to kind of carry the torch there.
Yeah, and Francisco Alvarez has been in a bit of a slump the last couple of weeks while he was dealing with a shoulder injury, and it seems like he's okay, but he hasn't been as productive at the plate in a little while now. But at the same time, catching positions never really valued for offense, and he is a major impact behind the plate, calling the game, framing, even throwing guys out. Like he is making his presence felt, but they could use his bat picking it up as well. And you saw last year he hit 25 home runs as a rookie, but his second half was really cold. So I guess they're probably hoping that it's not kind of a deja vu, but I mean, we'll see. I mean, he missed close to 2 months with after the thumb surgery. And yeah, I mean, that could also be having an effect on his offensive game right now. But yeah, I mean, they have some legit hitters. I mean, the emergence of Mark Vientos has been huge for them this year as well. He's been super impressive. So yeah, they got some offense here. It's just a matter of who's going to get hot and when. And it really, in their whole hot streak since the end of May, they all kind of collectively caught fire at the plate. And now guys are kind of evening out a little bit, slumps, ebbs and flows of the full season. I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just Torrens has been a really nice pickup too. I give Stearns credit there as a backup catcher. He's been very well saddling things when Alvarez isn't around. And you mentioned Vientos. Are the Mets surprised at all just how he's kind of, come to fruition here? I don't, it feels like a year or two ago, he was kind of one of those guys that was on the scrap heap. You thought maybe he'd get, cut or traded for just, an arm or something like that. And credit to the Mets. They didn't give up on him, even with Beatty there. And he really seems like someone that's going to be, hopefully a presence in the middle of that lineup for years to come now.
There's a few things on Vientos because I've been asking about him for at least the last 2 years. The Mets needed a bat at the 2022 deadline. They didn't wind up getting one, but Vientos was one of the names that I kept asking scouts about. And the projection on Vientos was he was going to be a 30 home run hitter, probably a first baseman DH profile in the big leagues. And like you said, he was a trade candidate because they had Beatty, who was their number 2 prospect at the time as of 2022. And Pete Alonso obviously was under contract for a couple more years. But Mark Vientos, yeah, the Mets sent him down. He thought he was going to be taking the DH spot this year. And they wound up signing JD Martinez at the 11th hour. It was a good pickup. And Vientos was noticeably angry about it, but he didn't point fingers. He didn't play the blame game. He went down, he took care of business, and he showed at a young age, he's only 24 years old, that he's able to overcome adversity, and he's been relevant and really has claimed that third base spot. And third base was always the position that we were told he couldn't play. And he's not that he's a plus defender at the position, but he's definitely not a liability there. He's looked pretty solid at the hot corner this year since he's taken the job from Beatty.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, not the best defender in the world, but obviously it seems adequate there, obviously. I mean, as far as the corners go, Alonso's not the best defensive first baseman in the world himself. But if you're hitting the way that they can, you live with that. But interesting to see how hopefully he can kind of keep this and build on it, do this next year, so on and so forth. But it seems like now, obviously, the Mets are going into a little lighter part of the schedule. They'll be in Anaheim tomorrow, an Angels team that just I mean, who do you know on the team? Nobody. Mike Trout, who knows if he's going to play again? That's a whole nother thing. But it feels like this is a time now where the Mets can really, position themselves to be one of those top one or two wild cards down the stretch run here and maybe make a little pad for themselves. I'm just kind of curious what you think now with kind of the schedule here on the stretch run going.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long West Coast trip, but it's not a very tough schedule moving forward. The Braves are very catchable. They're not the Braves that we've seen in the past. I know they did come back to split the series at Citi Field last weekend, but at the same time, they're missing Acuna for the rest of the year. They're missing Spencer Strider. They got Jorge Soler at the deadline again, speaking of deja vu, but it just doesn't feel like a year where they're going to catch fire down the stretch. The Phillies have been in a major slump. They're one of the worst in baseball since the second half began. And the Mets have gained a good bit of ground on them that the NL East isn't really that far out of reach, that they're 8 games back. But yeah, I would say that the top wildcard spot's definitely attainable. I guess the biggest worry for the Mets now is probably the San Diego Padres, who were super aggressive at the deadline and made some improvements. And even before the deadline, they were aggressive. They got Luis Arias, they got Dylan Cease, and now they went all out and got Tanner Scott and made some moves to their roster. And that's just common with AJ Preller every year, but at the same time, they're kind of more of a threat in the NL all of a sudden.
Yeah, no, right. Like you said, AJ Preller always aggressive, made a lot of moves and do it in different waves, right? Team is different than it was a couple of years ago. They trade Soto and all that, but still retool enough with the guys that they have to continue to be competitive. But you mentioned as far as with the Mets, just kind of how they've really, I think June 11th, they were 17 and a half games back in the standings in in the division. Now they're 8 games back. They gamed over 10 games, like you said. Philly's really been slumping. Atlanta doesn't seem like the same team. At what point, if not already, do people start talking about possibly, manager of the year votes for Carlos Mendoza, just like with the turnaround he's done? Obviously, there wasn't a ton of expectations. It seemed a last minute hire, right? They wanted someone else allegedly that didn't happen. And I don't know, panic move is the right way to say it, but was not their first choice, but really seems like someone that's, has a good relationship with Stearns. They're going to have a good partnership. The players like, and he seems to really know what he's doing, as far as pushing the right button. So just kind of curious your thoughts on Mendoza's first year so far here.
It's been really good. And he's been able to lead a turnaround, and I give him credit for the lineup tweaks. I mean, that really is where he was kind of searching the first couple of months, and they had so many different lineup combinations, and then they hit one that works and they've stuck with it. And Pete Alonso has been a cleanup hitter basically his whole career. So once they flipped him from the 3-hole back to the cleanup spot, and JD Martinez to the 3-hole, obviously Nimmo and Lindor flipping, I mean, they've seen a lot of success. So if the Mets continue on the trajectory that they've been on, and they make the postseason in a year where they weren't expected to and looked dead in the water at 22 and 33 and rock bottom in the end of May with Glovegate and Jorge Lopez, then I think Mendoza's got a strong case for manager of the year, even if they go into the wild card series and lose, because I guess playoff rotation is probably the biggest concern. They got to get there first, but playoff rotation is a concern if Senga's not able to return by October. Severino's had a really good year, obviously a bad start today. Sean Manaea and Jose Quintana have been really good since Alvarez came back in June. But in a postseason series, I don't know that their playoff rotation matches up too well with an opponent. But at the same time, we'll see. And again, even if they make the postseason, I think that's a pretty good enough case for Mendoza to receive some votes and have a pretty good chance to win manager of the year as a rookie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree as far as what the pitching goes, but if they can even make it as, if they can make it as a wild card, I think making the postseason, it's a total success of a year if they can do that. And I guess just kind of last thing, just riffing with the success now that Mendoza's having and everything else. Are people talking about, like, I don't know, like a storm on the horizon is the right thing, but just like all this money coming off the books in the last couple of years, like, is there a sense that Stearns is just like, you're really going to see the reins come off here in an off season, that like we're really going to see what he can do with full resources now with Cohen's Mets? I'm just like kind of curious if it feels like it's now, especially with the success that's going on, it feels like it's impending no matter what now here for a big off season.
He'll certainly have more funds than he's ever had as a baseball executive. And David Stearns is good at making some underrated moves.
Sure.
And he built a number of playoff teams with a small payroll in Milwaukee.
Right.
And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he uses that money. I think Steve Cohen and the Mets have to be confident that David Stearns is a guy who he's not just going to shop in the gourmet section and make, blind big signings that aren't going to work out just to make them because he's got the money now. I think he's going to make some calculated moves. And the fact that he's able to have that financial flexibility now for the first time in his career as an exec, it should be interesting to see how that plays out. And obviously the question is going to be whether they re-sign Alonso. Are they going to be players for Juan Soto?
Sure.
We got a little ways to go until then, but yeah, I mean, money coming off the books, they're going to save $17.5 million because Justin Verlander's vesting option isn't going to kick in. So that's pretty big for them as well. So yeah, we'll see. They will have some room to start spending again in the winter, which was the plan all along with the money coming off the books.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, with the year they're having now, I think Mets fans should be very happy with the management in place, powers that be. I think they're setting the team up for a nice, long, successful run here. We hope, fingers crossed and all that, but they got to get through the next 2 months first. But Pat, that's all we got for tonight, man. Thanks so much for coming on. We always appreciate it. Check out everything that's going on the rest of the year that Pat's putting out. It's always great. And as always, we'll catch you next week. And let's go Mets.
Thanks, Al.